A war veteran returns to a quiet town looking for peace, but discovers a broken canine dog rejected by the system. Together, they unravel a web of corruption involving law enforcement and the mistreatment of service dogs. As the town turns against them and secrets rise to the surface, a small group of allies risks everything to expose the truth. With the dog at his side, the veteran must fight not just for justice, but for redemption. But not everything ends cleanly. Not every truth brings closure. And as the sun sets over a town forever changed, one question remains: what comes next for those who gave everything to save what was forgotten? Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. The morning sky bled a strange glow over Greenwood, a small American town where secrets lurked behind every wooden fence. A wandering war veteran, a forsaken canine dog, and a quiet nurse with haunted eyes. None of them knew their fates would collide. Here, whispers of corruption had already seeped into dusty storefronts and lonely diners, igniting suspicion among fearful locals. A fierce storm was gathering, promising betrayal, courage, and redemption in equal measure. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. Valerie Hayes was not the kind of woman most people expected in a peaceful rural town. At 68 years old, her spine remained ramrod straight, a habit learned from years of helicopter missions in the thick canopies of Vietnam. They used to call her Angel of the Night because she'd fly medevac choppers into impossible combat zones, fetching wounded soldiers under mortar fire. But on this crisp morning in Greenwood, Valerie wasn't wearing a flight suit. Instead, she wore faded jeans, a button-down shirt, and an old tan jacket whose left sleeve bore a subtle military patch. She'd arrived in town only a week earlier, renting a small, single-story house near the local diner. Rest wasn't truly on her mind, though she told most folks she just wanted a quiet retirement. Really, she had come chasing an old rumor that Greenwood's K9 training facility was on the brink of shutting down amid rumors of corruption at the local sheriff's department. Valerie needed to see it for herself. Maybe, deep down, she just wanted to protect a place that reminded her of the loyalty she'd seen from the dogs that accompanied soldiers overseas. As she passed by the picket fences and flower beds, a sense of calm belied the tension she'd sensed under Greenwood's postcard-perfect surface. War had taught her that real trouble always felt like an electric hum in the air, and Greenwood's hum was deafening if you knew how to listen. A chance encounter. Across town, Jake Thompson, an honorably discharged veteran of a more recent conflict, rolled out of a borrowed couch in the back office of Buddy's auto shop. He had shown up in Greenwood just 2 days ago, a single backpack slung over his broad shoulders. Though lean and quiet, he carried the baggage of multiple tours in the Middle East, along with a stubborn limp from a shrapnel wound. He had come here for a job lead that never panned out, and now he found himself stuck in a place overshadowed by farmland, slow traffic, and suspicious stares from locals. Buddy, the shop's grizzled owner, had taken pity on him, letting him crash for a night or two. But Jake knew this arrangement wouldn't last long. By 9 o'clock, Jake wandered down Greenwood's main street, searching for coffee and maybe a half-hearted sense of purpose. That's when he noticed the small commotion in front of the K9 training facility. A tall chain-link fence surrounded the property, and a sign read, "Greenwood K9 Unit, Funding Appeal." Outside, a handful of men in uniform milled about, talking in hushed, frustrated tones. One large man in a deputy's shirt pinned a notice to the fence. Facility closure. 30 days' notice. Jake felt a pang in his chest. He had seen service dogs in action. Those animals saved lives. Something about it felt personal, even though he had no direct tie to Greenwood's K9 unit. Still, his gut told him this wasn't just a budget cut. He'd read about small towns where corruption snaked through the police department, turning law enforcement into a personal fiefdom for local power brokers. While he hovered uncertainly, the door to the training facility opened, and a battered K9 hobbled out on 3 good legs, dragging the 4th like it had been injured or never healed properly. The deputy scowled. "Just put that dog down," Jake heard him say to a subordinate. "He can't serve. He's useless." At that moment, Valerie Hayes walked up behind Jake, her eyes immediately fixed on the dog. The creature's coat was a mix of black and tan, maybe a German shepherd with some Belgian Malinois in there, and it clearly bore the scars of something. Violent, maybe an explosion or a careless bullet. The dog's gaze met Valerie's for half a second, filled with a silent desperation, and something within her churned. "That dog's name is Max," said a quiet voice at the fence. Mia Carter, an animal welfare volunteer, had stepped forward. She brushed her hair aside, revealing an ID badge. "He was supposed to be part of the Greenwood K9 program, but I suspect he got hurt under suspicious circumstances." Conflicting loyalties. Valerie nodded, noticing the tension flaring around them. One of the deputies, a tall, lean man with a bristling mustache named Deputy Rawlings, stepped in. "Look, lady, these decisions are above your pay grade. The town can't afford a half-crippled dog. This facility's on the chopping block, and so's that reject." Jake's fists clenched reflexively, and Valerie's lips formed a taut line. She locked eyes with the dog again, then with Rawlings. "I'll take him," Valerie said suddenly, her voice calm but unyielding. Rawlings sputtered. "This ain't a rescue shelter, ma'am, and you don't have the authority." Jake stepped in, surprising even himself. "She said she'll take him, so let her." Rawlings glared, sizing them both up. "This dog's property of the Greenwood Sheriff's Department." Valerie stared him down, a lifetime of command in her steely gaze. "Sounds like you're about to shut this place, which means the dog might just become another statistic. Hand him over with a release form and I'll assume responsibility." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Rawlings' face. He was used to pushing folks around, but something about Valerie's posture told him she wasn't a typical retiree. Maybe it was the way her jacket had a faint insignia on the shoulder, or how her eyes gave nothing away. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine, but don't come crying to the county if that mutt needs expensive vet care." He ripped a form from his clipboard, scribbled his signature, and practically threw it at Valerie. "You're making a big mistake," he added under his breath. "We don't like outsiders meddling in our affairs." An unspoken bond, the old. Dog, Max, limped toward Valerie, sniffing her shoes warily. She reached a hand out, her voice gentle. "Max," she murmured, "I'm Valerie. Let's get out of here." Jake stood there, not sure what to do next. Instinctually he offered, "I can give you both a ride. My friend Buddy loaned me a truck." Valerie glanced at him, curiosity evident. "Thanks," she said. No further small talk was needed. In that silent exchange, something was forged. 2 veterans, each burdened by ghosts, momentarily united, over a wounded K9 cast aside by a corrupt system. A brewing storm that afternoon. The sun cast long shadows across Greenwood, coloring its peaceful facade with an ominous undertone. Deputy Rawlings met with Sheriff Donovan in a back office at the station. Donovan was a seasoned officer with the permanent scowl of a man used to getting what he wanted. "They took the dog," Rawlings said, flicking a pen across the desk. "An old lady and some drifter." Donovan's jaw tightened. "We can't afford outsiders digging into our business, especially not now. Any snooping around the K9 program might expose the deals we've got going. We're 1 month away from flipping that land to those real estate investors. We can't have complications." Rawlings nodded. "I'll keep an eye on them." Across town, Mia Carter, the animal welfare advocate, parked her modest sedan in front of Greenwood's only diner. She slipped into a booth opposite a quiet nurse with tired eyes, Rebecca Holcomb. Rebecca was known for her calm compassion and her private heartbreak. Rumor said she'd served as a combat nurse in the Middle East, returning with invisible scars. Mia laid it out. They gave Max to an older woman who showed up out of nowhere, and a second veteran, Jake Thompson, was there. I'm worried these two will try to dig deeper into why the dog was injured. If they do, they might discover the questionable training exercises the sheriff's department has been running. Rebecca swallowed, her gaze drifting to the window. This town has a lot of secrets, Mia. A lot of folks are too afraid to speak up. But if these new arrivals are determined, maybe it's time we stand with them. A moment of peace. Then, a warning. Valerie and Jake sat on the front porch of Valerie's rented house, watching Max attempt to settle onto a worn blanket. The dog whimpered softly, the pain in his leg evident. Jake broke the silence. I can see you're used to leading, he said with a half-smile. Ex-military, right? She gave him a measured nod. Army, Vietnam. You? He exhaled. Army. As well, just a different war. Didn't expect to land here in Greenwood, but life is full of curveballs. They shared a brief, understanding look, an empathy that only fellow veterans could share. Before either could say more, a black SUV rolled slowly down the street. Its tinted windows cast reflections of the setting sun. It paused in front of Valerie's property for a beat too long, then continued on. Jake and Valerie exchanged glances. The unspoken question hung in the air. Who was watching them, and why? Nightfall resolutions. Max dozed off, finally, lulled by the cool evening breeze. While Valerie rummaged through her old supply trunk inside the house, she emerged with bandages and a small kit. I can at least stabilize that leg. Keep him comfortable until we see a vet tomorrow, she announced. Jake offered to help, carefully placing a supportive brace around Max's injured hind leg. The dog flinched a few times, but eventually relaxed. Under their gentle touch, we'll figure this out, Valerie murmured to Max. She cast a glance at Jake. I suspect we're knee-deep in something bigger. Jake nodded. I've seen this pattern before. Corruption often hides in quiet places, convinced nobody's going to poke around. We'll need allies. Valerie gazed at the dimming horizon. Mia Carter might help. That nurse, Rebecca Holcomb, she has an air of quiet resolve. And maybe we can talk to Buddy. He seems well connected. Jake nodded. Count me in. I owe this town nothing, but I can't stand by while good dogs, good people, get hurt for someone else's profit. Invitation to destiny as darkness fully settled. Greenwood's silhouette glowed under streetlights that flickered ominously. In that hush, two veterans and a wounded K9 found themselves on a porch, unlikely companions in a brewing fight. An old woman with steel in her spine, a younger man wrestling with invisible wounds, and a dog whose loyal heart refused to give in. They had no idea how tangled the threads of corruption were, nor how many enemies lurked behind the sheriff's badge and beyond. Yet the tension in the air told them there was no turning back. Greenwood wasn't just a stopping point on their individual journeys anymore. It was their battlefield. Would they unravel the mystery of the K9 unit's shady shutdown? Could they expose the corruption eating away at the heart of the sheriff's department? And when the time came, would they stand as a united front, or would fear drive them apart? The sun was just beginning to rise over Greenwood, spilling orange light across dew-covered fields and the rust-red rooftops of old barns. Jake stood on the edge of the woods behind Buddy's auto shop, Max at his side, the leash slack in his hand. The dog limped, but his eyes were alert, scanning the trees, pausing to sniff at a patch of grass like a soldier tracking danger in enemy terrain. The bond between them was still fragile, but something about the quiet way Max leaned against. His leg told Jake everything he needed to know. They understood each other. Jake hadn't slept much. The floor of Valerie's living room was decent enough, but it wasn't the creaky mattress that kept him up. It was the look in Max's eyes when the dog jerked awake from whatever nightmares haunted him. Jake had seen those same tremors in men he'd served with. Max didn't have the words to say it, but the pain was there. The betrayal burned into his bones. They made their way slowly through town, passing by shuttered storefronts and fences lined with rusted tools. The people of Greenwood stirred slowly in the morning, and those who noticed Jake mostly looked away, except one. Deputy Carl Rawlings was waiting near the corner of Main and Allen Street, leaning against his patrol cruiser like he owned the sidewalk. His uniform was too crisp, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that didn't blink enough. As Jake approached, Max tensed, growling faintly, and Jake immediately knew they'd crossed into hostile territory. "Well, well," Rawlings said, pushing off the car and straightening to full height. "Didn't think I'd see you again so soon, soldier boy." Jake didn't slow his step. "Not a soldier anymore." "Right," Rawlings replied, falling into step beside him, voice syrupy with sarcasm. "Forgot. You're the wandering type now, picking up broken dogs and pretending you're gonna fix them." Jake stopped walking. His gaze remained steady. "Max isn't broken," Rawlings chuckled. "Sure he is, just like you. Discharged, damaged, dragging that leg like a ghost from some war nobody cares about anymore." The leash in Jake's hand tightened instinctively. He didn't respond with fists, though part of him wanted to. He'd learned long ago how quickly an insult could turn into bloodshed, and that's what men like Rawlings waited for. He stepped slightly between the deputy and Max. "You got something to say," Jake said, low and even. "Say it to me." "Not the dog," Rawlings shrugged. "Just giving you a heads up. Greenwood's a quiet town. We don't take kindly to troublemakers or charity cases trying to stir things up." Jake smiled coldly. "Then maybe you should stop acting like one." The deputy's smile faded. For a second, the street went quiet. The hum of town life, someone hammering down the block, a dog barking in the distance, dimmed. Then Rawlings stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Just be careful, Thompson," he said. "You don't know how things work around here. You think you're helping that dog? Maybe. But you start sniffing around places you shouldn't, and you're going to find yourself real lonely, real fast." Jake didn't answer. He turned and walked away, Max hobbling beside him, ears still pinned back. But as they crossed the street and disappeared around the corner, neither man noticed the black SUV idling in the alley behind the sheriff's office, its windows darkened like obsidian, the engine silent. Inside that SUV, a man in a suit with a scar beneath his left eye tapped his fingers against the steering wheel and watched Jake walk away. Then he picked up his phone, dialed a number, and spoke only 4 words. "He has the dog." Back at the house, Valerie was waiting with fresh bandages and a large bowl of water. She'd cleared a space near the fireplace for Max, laying out a pillow and an old fleece blanket. When she saw Jake's face, she didn't ask questions. "Rawlings," she said. "Yep," she nodded. That one always smelled like bad orders. Jake knelt beside Max, gently inspecting the leg the vet had wrapped the day before. The swelling had gone down slightly, and the dog's eyes were calmer than the night before. But something still lingered, something Max had seen or remembered that he couldn't forget. "You think it's true?" Jake asked quietly. "What Mia said yesterday, that someone did this to him on purpose?" Valerie folded her arms, her jaw tightening. "I've seen that kind of wound before, not from training accidents. That was close range. Maybe punishment, maybe worse." Jake stood, his expression darkening. "Then I want to know who pulled the trigger." Valerie didn't argue. She stepped into the kitchen, came back with an old folder. "I made some calls last night. Couple old contacts from the VA put me in touch with a woman who used to work in the county's dog unit. She said there were problems, unfiled complaints, budget inconsistencies, and she hinted that Max's injury might have come after someone. Refused to let him be sold." "Sold?" Jake's voice sharpened. Valerie nodded. "Unofficially. Word is, the sheriff's office has been selling trained dogs under the table. Max wasn't part of the plan. He resisted a handler once, bit him during a disciplinary session. After that, he was labeled unstable." Jake looked down at Max, who stared back with wide, loyal eyes. "He was protecting himself," Jake said. "Or someone else," Valerie murmured. They agreed then, without ceremony or speeches, that something needed to be done. Not just for Max, but for every dog caught in whatever ugly game the sheriff's department was playing. Jake called Mia. She answered on the second ring, voice cautious. "Something wrong?" "Rawlings came after me this morning," Jake said. "Didn't like that I took Max. He knows we're digging." A pause. Then, "Meet me tonight at the edge of the training facility. After dark. I'll bring something that might help you understand what Max went through." "Understood," Jake said. He hung up, and for a moment silence returned to the house. Then Valerie looked at him and spoke the words neither of them had wanted to say just yet. "We're being watched." Jake nodded. "I know. There was someone in a black SUV after the vet visit yesterday. Same one near the station this morning." Valerie's voice dropped. "Then we move fast." Outside, storm clouds gathered in the west, painting long grey strokes across the horizon. Inside, Jake ran his hand over Max's back, the dog pressing gently into his palm. The bond was real now, not just between man and dog, but between broken lives joined by a single mission. By nightfall, everything would change again. The wind picked up just after sunset, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something unsettled. Jake parked the truck a few blocks from the training facility, killing the headlights and letting the engine fade into silence. Max stirred beside him on the seat, head lifting with that sharp instinct that never left a dog trained. To sense danger, Jake reached over, giving Max a quiet scratch behind the ear. "Stay low, just watch." They waited in the shadows for a few minutes, just long enough for the street to empty of traffic and the town to settle into its usual nighttime hush. Then, out of the dark, a small figure emerged from behind the trees, bordering the edge of the facility. Mia. She waved him forward and led him around to a service gate left partially open, the chain lock dangling like an afterthought. Inside, the facility was half-gutted. Where once there had been full training courses, obstacle rings, padded halls, open cages, now there was only silence and the echo of long-buried barks. Jake could feel it in the air, the memory of something broken. Mia didn't speak right. "Away!" She brought him to the edge of the old supply shed, knelt and pulled up a loose floorboard. Inside was a metal lockbox, rusted at the edges. She popped it open with a key from around her neck. "I kept copies," she said. "Not all, but enough. Vet records, handler reports, some emails. Max's file is in there too." Jake took the folder with Max's name scrawled across the top. The first few pages were what he expected. Vaccination records, training assessments, a glowing recommendation from the early months. But halfway through, the tone changed. Notes were crossed out. A red stamp marked, "Aggressive, not suitable for service." And one handwritten complaint stood out. "Dog bit Officer K after being struck with baton. Handler insists it was discipline, but injury photos suggest excessive force." Jake looked up, jaw tight. "They beat him." Mia nodded. "He fought back. That's why they shot him in the leg. Said it was an accident during a drill. But I think they wanted to make an example out of him." Jake flipped through the rest of the file, his chest burning hotter with each page. Names were blacked out, but not all of them. He recognized one. Donovan. Another name kept repeating. Reynolds. He didn't know it yet, but he would soon. "I need to talk to the person who wrote these reports," he said. Mia hesitated. "She's gone. Left town last month after her tires were slashed and her house was broken into. She's in Nebraska now, staying off the grid." Jake stood there, silent. Max approached from behind the fence, resting his head against Jake's leg. "We'll get him justice," Jake said. "Every one of them, whoever did this, whoever let it happen." Mia reached into her bag and handed over a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Take it. Back it up. If I disappear, this doesn't die with me." Jake slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't thank her. She didn't need it. They both understood what kind of line they had just crossed. As they exited the facility, a noise behind them made Jake stop. Footsteps, then silence. He turned, eyes sharp, but there was no one there. Back in the truck, Max didn't settle until they were miles away from the facility. He paced the floorboard nervously, and whining low in his throat. Jake drove in silence, eyes scanning the rearview mirror. When they reached the house, Valerie was on the porch, arms crossed. "You were followed," she said before he even stepped out. Jake didn't answer right away. He reached for the flash drive in his pocket, clutched it tight, and looked her dead in the eye. "Good," he said. "Let them watch. They're about to see what a real fight looks like." Valerie woke before sunrise, already dressed in that old military jacket that told you she wasn't the kind of woman who needed coffee to be sharp. She'd spent the night on the couch, rifle case on the floor beside her, eyes flicking toward every creak and whisper outside the windows. Jake barely slept. Max had paced half the night, whining low near the door, like he sensed something out there, something circling. By mid-morning, a blue Subaru rolled up the gravel road. The woman who stepped out was tall, dark-haired, with sleeves rolled to her elbows and a determined squint in her eyes. Mia introduced her as Robin Reyes, her logistics partner from the Animal Welfare Group. 2 more volunteers followed, unloading. Equipment from the trunk, canine harnesses, surveillance cameras, and first aid kits. They worked fast, quiet, precise. Not one of them asked unnecessary questions. They weren't here for small talk. Robin set up shop inside Valerie's garage, transforming it into a makeshift command center. Laptops came out, files were scanned. The flash drive Mia had handed over was duplicated 3 times and uploaded to cloud storage. Valerie watched the operation unfold with arms crossed and an approving nod. Jake, on the other hand, stayed with Max, walking slow circles around the yard to keep the dog calm. But Max's attention kept drifting to the woods across the road, ears twitching at the faintest snap of a twig. By afternoon, more locals began stopping by. First came an older man with a grim face who slid a manila envelope under the door and drove off without a word. Then a woman with a stroller dropped off a rolled-up newspaper and whispered to Mia, "Page 3, bottom corner." Inside were names, a list of dogs deemed unfit by the sheriff's office, many of whom had simply vanished. Jake circled names, matching dates to files they already had. It didn't take long before a pattern emerged. They'd been running a scheme. Dogs were marked as aggressive or untrainable, then quietly sold off the books to buyers across state lines. Some ended up in underground rings. Some likely didn't survive at all. Jake stared at Max longer than usual that evening, running his hand along the dog's back, feeling the outline of old scars. He didn't have to say it out loud. Everyone knew Max had been on that same list. Later that night, Deputy Rawlings drove past the house twice, once going slow, the second time stopping for a full minute. His headlights lit up the porch, the windows, the truck parked in the drive. Then he left. They didn't sleep that night either, but they weren't scared. They were preparing. It started with a video. Just 30 seconds of Max, limping through the field behind Valerie's house, nose to the ground, then pausing to alert beside a shed where a neighbor's missing child had been hiding for hours. The kid had wandered off during a tantrum. Max found him without hesitation. Robin uploaded the clip that night. By morning, it had nearly 20,000 views. People didn't see a broken dog. They saw a hero. The comments poured in, each one louder than the last. Why was this dog ever rejected? Who let this happen? We need answers. Mia and her team leaned into the momentum. Photos of other injured dogs surfaced, some with anonymous captions. People from nearby towns started sharing their own stories, like puzzle pieces falling into place, abandoned paperwork, mysterious transfers, silent goodbyes to animals once hailed as elite. Jake wasn't used to being at the center of attention, but he adapted quickly. When he spoke at a small town hall meeting, he didn't read from notes. He just told the truth about Max, about what he suspected had happened, about why it mattered. He didn't beg for sympathy. He didn't pretend to be perfect. But the room went silent when he spoke. People listened. That same night, someone smashed the mailbox in front of the house. Next, they found tire marks skidding across the lawn and a dead rabbit left near the porch. Jake buried it himself. Said nothing, but the next morning he helped Mia hang a handmade banner across the gate. Justice for the forgotten. They started hosting open training days, showing families what a dog like Max could still do. Kids came to pet him. Veterans brought their own animals, some with the same haunted eyes. It became something more than therapy. It became proof. Inside the sheriff's office, the walls were closing in. Deputy Rawlings made more patrols than usual. Officers who used to smirk started avoiding eye contact. Jake noticed, and Max did too. Sheriff Donovan didn't speak much when angry. He'd learned long ago that rage was more effective when it simmered, quiet and cold. But that morning, when Deputy Rawlings handed him a printed screenshot of Max's viral video and the banner hanging in front of Valerie's place, the sheriff crushed his coffee cup without a word. That night, Rawlings knocked on Jake's door. Under the pretense of a welfare check, Valerie answered with her sidearm holstered on her hip and her voice low and firm. "He's fine. You can leave now." Rawlings didn't argue, but when he turned to leave, he glanced at Max, then back at Jake and said, "You've stirred up something bigger than you can handle. People get hurt when they don't know their place." The next morning, the smear campaign started. An anonymous post spread across local forums accusing Jake of misconduct during his last deployment. Claims of insubordination, aggressive behavior, mental instability. The kind of lies that stuck, even without proof. Someone had dug into his military file and twisted what little they could find. Mia was furious. She tried to get the posts taken down, but they multiplied faster than she could reach them. Even the town newspaper ran a quiet piece, questioning the credibility of online activists, stirring unrest. Jake didn't react. He worked harder, trained with Max every morning, dug through more files with Valerie every night. If they wanted to destroy his reputation, they'd have to work harder than that. But the air around them changed. Some neighbors stopped waving. A few stopped coming altogether. Even Buddy, who'd always had Jake's back, looked nervous when they came by the garage. One night, Jake caught sight of the black SUV again, parked down the block, engine running. It pulled away before he could get close. But Max had already seen it, and he hadn't looked away. The break-in happened just after midnight. The back door wasn't kicked or shattered. It was pried open, clean and quiet, the work of someone who didn't want to wake anyone until they were already inside. Max should have barked, should have growled or stirred or done anything at all. But he wasn't in the house. Jake woke with a jolt when the wind pushed the bedroom curtain aside and cold air swept in. He sat up, instantly alert. The house was still, too still. No movement from Max's corner, no familiar scrape of claws on the old wood floor. He moved fast, bare feet hitting the cold ground. Valerie was already out of her room, pistol in hand. Her voice was quiet, sharp. "Where's Max?" Jake didn't answer. He was already running through the kitchen, finding the back door cracked open, the screen swinging lazily. Outside, the night was thick with fog. The silence was unbearable. He stepped into the yard, barefoot, not feeling the frost-bitten grass. No prints, no blood, just absence. A hole in the world where the dog should have been. They searched the property, flashlights cutting through the trees. Mia arrived within 10 minutes, still pulling on a sweatshirt. Robin followed. They moved like a unit, checking sheds, roads, fences, but deep down, Jake already knew. Max hadn't wandered off. Someone had taken him. The graffiti was scrawled across the side of the garage. Thick black spray paint, sloppy. Letters dripping down the siding. "Go home." Jake stared at it until the others pulled him away. He didn't speak for the rest of the night. The next morning, Mia got a tip. An anonymous message through her rescue network. No return address, no signature, just a photo, blurry, taken at night, but unmistakable. Max in the back of a van, eyes glassy from sedation, a small gash above his brow. Below it, a single line. "You should have stayed out of it." Jake printed the photo and tacked it to the kitchen wall. No ceremony, no words, but something shifted in the house after that. They stopped waiting, stopped hoping the system would fix itself. It was time to act. Valerie pulled out maps. Robin compiled the names they'd gathered, every officer connected to the K9 unit, every warehouse near the outskirts of town, every decommissioned property the sheriff's office still had access. So the air in the house became electric, charged with something hot and feral. No one spoke of fear anymore, just facts, just plans. Jake spent hours walking the perimeter of the woods, looking for signs, for scent trails Max might have left behind. He wasn't trained in this, not fully, but he'd spent enough time beside. Dogs in war zones to know how they moved, how they hid pain, how they left clues when they wanted to be found. He found a small piece of fabric snagged on the fence at the edge of the property. Black canvas, like from a vest or carrier. Max's fur clung to it. He brought it back to the house and placed it on the kitchen table. He fought, Jake said quietly. Even sedated, he tried. Valerie looked at the fabric and then at Jake. Then so will we. By nightfall, the house wasn't just a safe space anymore. It was a base, a bunker. They secured the doors, rerouted power to an auxiliary generator, installed motion sensors along the road, and in the center of it all, Jake sat staring at Max's picture, the room around him silent, except for the steady, rhythmic tapping of his pen against the wood. They had taken the wrong dog, and they had underestimated the wrong man. The air in the house had thickened, like the walls themselves understood something had broken. No one laughed. No one lingered. The days blurred into each other, filled with whispers, movement, plans, each more urgent than the last. Jake stood in front of the map they'd pinned to the living room wall, red pushpins marking potential locations where Max might have been. Taken, warehouses, abandoned barns, properties linked to the sheriff's office through shell companies and private trusts. Robin had tracked the registry data herself, double-checking every scrap of information. Valerie had scouted 2 locations already, moving like she was back in the jungle, silent and calculated. But nothing concrete yet. They needed more. Mia pulled through. She found security footage from a gas station on Route 18, time-stamped the night. Max vanished. A van matching the one in the photo had pulled in, stayed for 5 minutes and drove off westbound. The plates were blocked with a cloth, but a bumper sticker, a faded army insignia, was visible. It was an old trick, one used to blend in to avoid suspicion. Jake recognized it instantly. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "That's Reynolds," he muttered. "I'd bet my life on it." Valerie looked up. "You know him?" Jake nodded slowly. "Grant Reynolds. Private security contractor, dishonorably discharged before I ever served, but his name floated around. Dirty work. Black ops without the flag. If Donovan called in someone like him, it means he's scared." "Scared of what?" Robin asked. Jake didn't answer right away. He looked at Max's empty cushion in the corner of the room. "Of what?" "Happens when we don't quit." They shifted into action. Valerie made calls. 2 of Jake's old squadmates, now running a security firm up north, agreed to help. Not with guns yet, but with eyes, tech, drones, surveillance tools civilians weren't supposed to have. Meanwhile, Susan Alvarez, a local journalist, finally responded to the tip Mia had left on her voicemail days earlier. She met them at a roadside diner, nervous, skeptical, but curious. Jake laid out the evidence. Not all of it, but enough. Max's file, vet records, training logs, the stolen dog registry. He didn't ask her to believe him, just to look. She took one look at the photograph of Max in the van and froze. "That's the McConnell property. I recognize the stone wall behind him. It's an old quarry road, private, no access anymore." Jake leaned forward. "You're sure?" 100%. "My cousin used to sneak in there to fish." "It's secluded. Sheriff Donovan's brother-in-law owns it," Susan promised. To dig deeper and left without finishing her coffee. Mia printed maps of the quarry grounds. Jake circled the building they guessed the van had backed into, then circled the 2 ridgelines nearby. No cameras, no neighbors. That night, Jake stood outside under the stars, staring out over the dark treetops. Max was out there. He could feel it, not broken, not beaten, waiting. The wind was sharp on the ridge overlooking the quarry road. Jake lay flat against the brush, scanning the building below through binoculars. It wasn't just an abandoned warehouse like it appeared on paper. Movement inside, dim lights flickering behind tinted windows. At least 2 armed guards outside, pacing with lazy confidence. One of them wore a jacket emblazoned with the insignia of a private security firm Jake recognized instantly. Not a legitimate one. Not the kind you'd call when you needed help. The kind you called when you needed to make someone disappear. Back at the house, Robin monitored drone footage from the van parked 2 miles away. The drone zipped above the tree line, silent, invisible to anyone without a reason to look up. Inside, Valerie marked coordinates on a printout while Mia patched through a call to one of Jake's contacts, a man named Elias who worked quiet jobs. Out of state, but had a history with Reynolds, Elias confirmed what Jake suspected. Reynolds had been in Greenwood for 2 days, and he hadn't come alone. That night, Jake returned from the ridge with dirt on his knees and tension in his shoulders. He paced the kitchen, voice low, measured. They're holding Max inside the quarry warehouse. 2 guards out front, possibly more inside. Reynolds is there, which means this isn't just about dogs anymore. Valerie listened in silence, her fingers drumming against the table. You think they're moving him? Not yet, Jake said. But they will, the moment they feel heat from Susan's investigation, or if they suspect we're closing in. We won't get a second shot. They knew the sheriff wouldn't use official channels to defend his empire. He didn't need uniforms when he had men like Reynolds. Ghosts who operated in shadows, never leaving fingerprints, never needing backup. The kind of men who smiled while doing things that made others flinch. That evening, Susan Alvarez sent a message. One of her contacts in the county records office had confirmed what she feared. The McConnell Quarry property had quietly changed ownership 3 months ago to a shell company registered in Florida, with silent partners connected to off-the-books K9 imports. Donovan's clearing his trail, she wrote. Fast, Jake stared at her message, knuckles white against the back of his phone. Then he stood up and started preparing a field kit. Valerie followed without question, checking ammunition, packing her med pouch. They weren't kicking in any doors yet, but they were close. Too close for comfort. That night, the porch light shorted out. Then came the sound of tires on gravel, stopping just out of sight, the low hum of an engine idling. And then, silence. Jake stepped out with the shotgun resting low by his side, scanning the road, eyes narrowed. No one was there. But when he returned to the front steps, he found something tucked into the mailbox. A dog tag. It wasn't Max's, it was Jake's. Jake held the dog tag in his palm for a long time, watching it glint under the porch light he'd just rewired. The engraving was unmistakable. His name, his rank, the numbers etched into him by a military that had forgotten his existence the moment he limped off that final transport. It wasn't just a warning. It was a message. They knew who he was, where he came from, and they wanted him to remember what he'd left behind. The next morning came heavy with silence. No birds, no breeze, just the kind of thick, anticipatory quiet that meant something was about to shift. Susan's newest report hit local news feeds just before dawn. It wasn't flashy, but it was damning. Leaked property documents, anonymous testimonies, blurred photos of bruised dogs behind wire fences. Enough to raise questions. Not enough for indictments. But it was a start. Jake didn't wait for a reaction. They moved before anyone could decide whether the story was worth believing. He and Valerie returned to the ridge, meeting Robin and Mia already stationed in the surveillance. Fun. The drone had done its job. Inside the warehouse, heat signatures revealed at least 4 individuals. One stationary, isolated in a smaller room toward the back. Smaller, lower, injured. It had to be Max. Valerie handed Jake a set of blueprints. Robin had managed to pull from an old building permit database. There was a secondary access point through the rear loading dock, long since overgrown but still intact. a straight path to the holding room if they could avoid detection. The plan wasn't elegant. It was designed for speed and risk, in and out, with just enough time to extract Max and, if possible, grab anything that might prove useful. They waited until dark. Jake moved like a shadow through the tree line. Years of training flooding back into his muscles like a second heartbeat. Valerie kept pace just behind him, silent and composed, rifle slung across her back. They reached the rear wall without incident. The gate creaked just once before it gave way. Inside, the warehouse reeked of metal and bleach. Old dog crates lined the walls, some empty, others still occupied. None of the animals stirred, sedated, or worse, than they found him. Max lay inside a reinforced cage, muzzle damp with blood, one leg stretched awkwardly beneath him. But his eyes snapped open the moment Jake whispered his name. Jake dropped to his knees, hand pressed to the mesh. "I got you, buddy, I'm here." Max didn't make a sound. He didn't need to. Valerie picked the lock, fast and clean. Jake wrapped Max in a blanket and hoisted him into his arms. The dog was lighter than he remembered. Too light. That's when Valerie spotted the crate tucked beneath a canvas tarp, labeled with a code, but open. Inside, folders, dozens of them. She grabbed as many as she could carry. They made it back out without a single shot fired. No alarms. No pursuit. Too easy. Jake didn't trust it for a second. Back at the house, Max was stabilized. Robin administered fluids and painkillers while Jake flipped through the stolen files. Shipment logs, purchase agreements. A network that stretched far beyond Greenwood, dozens of towns, hundreds of dogs, some still active in police forces, others lost to private buyers with no oversight. They hadn't just uncovered a town secret, they'd tripped over a national operation. Max slept curled against Jake's leg, breathing slow and shallow, as if even unconscious he refused to be apart from him. And outside, somewhere beyond the porch light's reach, a phone rang inside a black SUV. They didn't sleep, none of them. The adrenaline from pulling Max out was still alive in their veins, racing alongside the dread of what came next. He was alive, yes, but broken. The gash above his eye had reopened during the ride back, and his leg was swollen with deep bruising. Jake sat beside him through the night, wiping away blood with slow, careful hands. Max didn't flinch. He just kept his eyes on Jake as if saying, "I knew you'd come." By dawn, Valerie had gone through every file they stole. Robin matched names against personnel rosters, service logs, even tax records. Mia made calls, quiet ones to contacts in state offices who hated Donovan but had never had the proof to act. Susan was already drafting her next story. This one wouldn't be a soft exposé. This one would be a fire alarm. They all knew the operation wasn't over. If anything, pulling Max out had just turned the heat up. Donovan wouldn't forgive that. Reynolds wouldn't forget. The trap had to be set quickly, with cameras, witnesses, and timing that couldn't fail. The dog auctions had always been rumors, whispered deals behind locked doors, far from oversight. But Valerie found mention of one in the files, a private demonstration scheduled in 4 days, hosted at a rebranded training compound just past the county line. On paper, it was a meet and greet for potential law enforcement buyers. In reality, it was a sale. Jake made the call to Elias. The team would go in disguised as clients. Elias could pass as a security consultant. Jake would be his translator, someone who spoke the language of training and tactics. Valerie would stay outside, overseeing backup. Mia and Robin would run the surveillance van. Susan agreed to delay her story, just long enough to get footage from the event. Something irrefutable. Max tried to rise the next morning and nearly collapsed. Jake caught him. The dog licked his hand in frustration, whined low and ashamed. Jake knelt, forehead resting against Max's. "You don't have to fight," he said softly. "You already did your part." But Max had other plans. 3 days later, the auction began in a sleek facility surrounded by electric fencing and armed guards. Men in suits filled the parking lot, chatting in clipped tones. The inside was pristine, spotless floors, polished. Plaques and crates lined like merchandise along the walls. Each crate held a dog, restrained, sedated, dressed in false credentials and exaggerated training records. Jake walked among them, face neutral, eyes catching details. One of the guards was Reynolds. He stood near the rear door, arms crossed, eyes sweeping the crowd. He hadn't spotted Jake yet. Good. Then they brought out the demo dogs. 2 animals led by handlers, muzzles tight, eyes drugged and unfocused. When the first command was given, one of them flinched, dropped to the ground, and didn't move again. No one reacted. Jake's stomach turned. He gave the signal. Valerie activated the uplink. Every camera hidden in their watches, their pins, their belts, streamed live to a secure server. Mia hit record. And just as the bidding began, Susan published her story. Sirens were coming. Jake could already hear them. The auction room pulsed with tension, like the moment before a storm hits full force. Jake stood still among the polished men in suits, heart pounding, ears tuned not to the bidding, but to the distant promise of sirens. Reynolds hadn't seen him yet, but it was a matter of seconds now. Each time Jake glanced up, their eyes came closer to locking. Valerie's voice cracked through the earpiece, calm but sharp. 2 minutes. Local laws moving in. States. Close behind. You need to hold position. The handlers began demonstrating a second round of dogs. One, a malnourished shepherd, was forced to run a short course with a limp that mirrored Max's. The room didn't flinch. Someone laughed. Bids resumed. Numbers scribbled quickly and passed between hands. Jake felt rage climb his throat, burning like fire he couldn't put out. But he held steady. Behind the mirrored wall, Mia and Robin tracked every movement, recording, cataloguing, tagging faces. Susan sat beside them, hands trembling slightly as she typed up a real-time update for the feed that was now gaining thousands of views per minute. Comments poured in from veterans, dog handlers, police trainers, people who recognized the names, the faces, the lies. Then Reynolds shifted. His head turned toward Jake, slowly, like his gut had finally caught up with his eyes. Their gazes met. Recognition flared. His mouth twisted into something like a smile, but not quite. Jake gave him a small nod. The kind of nod that said, "Yeah, I'm exactly who you think I am." That's when the sirens broke the air. Outside, tires screeched as unmarked vehicles swarmed the facility. The men in suits froze mid-bid. One of the handlers reached for a weapon beneath the demo table. Jake moved. He surged forward, grabbing the handler's wrist and slamming it against the metal post. The gun clattered to the ground. Panic erupted. Bidders scattered. Chairs overturned. Papers flew like dead leaves in a windstorm. Reynolds drew his sidearm, leveling it on Jake. He never got the shot off. Max came in low from the left, muzzle bloodied, but eyes clear, charging past the open door where Valerie stood holding his leash. He slammed into Reynolds with everything he had. The two hit the ground hard. Reynolds' weapon skidded across the floor and stopped inches from Jake's boot. Jake picked it up, aimed it straight at Reynolds' chest. Max growled, low and primal. Reynolds didn't move. The front doors burst open and uniformed officers flooded the room. The sheriff's badge glinted among them, but this time it wasn't Donovan wearing it. It was Captain Farley from the state task force. The expression on his face said it all. He'd seen enough. Reynolds was cuffed. The handlers, too. Some bidders tried to sneak out. They didn't make it far. Jake knelt beside Max, running a hand down his side. "You weren't supposed to be here," he murmured. Max wagged his tail once, weak but defiant. Valerie reached. Then a second later, her rifle still slung across her shoulder. She looked down at Reynolds being dragged away, then over at Jake. That was one hell of a gamble. Jake exhaled. "I knew Max wouldn't let me go in alone." Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten. Inside, the last dog was freed from its crate. The sun was breaking across the hills when Jake stepped outside the auction facility. His boots crunched over broken glass and scattered paperwork, the debris left behind by men who thought their secrets would stay buried. Officers were everywhere now, uniforms from 3 counties and 2 agencies, taking statements, securing evidence, loading cuffed bodies into vans. It should have felt like a win, but something gnawed at him. Reynolds hadn't spoken a word since being dragged off the floor. No threats, no protests, just a cold smile as if he knew something no one else did. That kind of silence was never harmless. Valerie walked beside Jake, Max limping at her side, head held high despite the pain. Every few steps, someone stopped to thank them. Reporters gathered at the barricades. Cameras flashed. It was chaos, but beneath it all, attention was coiling tighter by the second. Then came the shout. A deputy yelled from the far edge of the lot. "He's gone!" Jake spun around, already moving. Donovan had never entered the building. Somehow, in all the noise and movement, the sheriff had slipped away. His cruiser was still parked along the side road, but the driver's door stood open, engine off, keys gone. He'd vanished into the trees. Valerie cursed under her breath and took off down the embankment. Jake followed, Max hobbling behind until Robin caught up and gently scooped the dog into her arms. The forest was dense but familiar. Jake had trained. In terrain like this, moved through it in places far hotter, far deadlier. He didn't speak, he didn't stop. They found Donovan 2 miles out, on a gravel road that dead-ended against an overlook. His truck was there, pointed toward the drop. He stood beside it, shoulders squared, one hand resting on the hood, the other holding a pistol. Jake slowed his steps. "Donovan!" he called out. The sheriff didn't turn. "You think this is a victory, son? It's not about me," Donovan laughed, a bitter, worn-out sound. "You don't know what we were doing, what this country asks for when nobody's watching, the dogs, the programs, the deals. You think I did this for money? I think you stopped caring who got hurt." Donovan turned then, face drawn, eyes sunken deep. "You think you're different, but one day you'll find yourself trading lives for policy. And when you do, I hope someone drags your name through the mud too." Jake took a step forward. "It's over." Donovan raised the pistol. Valerie was already moving, rifle up but not aimed. "Don't," she said. "Don't give them a reason to say you were the victim." For a moment the wind carried only silence. Then Max barked, sharp, steady. Donovan's hand trembled. He stared at the dog, at the people behind him, at the weight of the world crashing down. Then he dropped the gun. Valerie kicked it away and cuffed. Him herself, her expression unreadable. Later, as they drove Donovan back to the station in silence, Jake looked at Max, curled in the back seat. Eyes finally closed in rest. They had found the truth, brought down the ones hiding it, and walked away standing, but the war inside them. That would take longer to end. The courthouse was quieter than anyone expected. No protests, no shouting matches, just the steady hush of something inevitable falling into place. Donovan had been booked, fingerprinted, and formally charged. His attorney barely spoke during the arraignment, eyes down, jaw clenched tight. The courtroom held a strange weight, the kind that comes when a man who once held absolute power realizes that even he can't bend the rules anymore. Jake watched from the back row, flanked by Mia and Valerie. Max wasn't allowed inside, but he waited in the lobby with Robin, tail thumping lightly each time the door opened. Jake wanted him close, even now, especially now. The prosecution's case was building fast. The footage from the auction, the confiscated files, the testimony of officers who finally stepped forward. 2 deputies, young and visibly shaken, had asked to meet with Valerie the day after Donovan's arrest. They weren't proud of what they'd allowed, but they weren't trying to excuse it either. Just finally trying to do something right. One of them, Deputy Harris, sat across from Jake now in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "I saw what they were doing," he said, voice barely audible. "At first I thought it was part of some off-book training. Then I started hearing the dogs scream. One disappeared after biting a handler. Mac, he fought. I think he knew." Jake nodded slowly. "He always knows." Harris swallowed hard. "I want to testify." Mia stepped forward, voice gentle. "You'll be risking a lot." You sure? I should have spoken up sooner, Harris said. Doesn't matter what it costs me now. News of the trial spread fast. National outlets picked up Susan's articles. Veterans groups issued public statements. Petitions called for sweeping reform in K9 handling programs. Suddenly, Greenwood wasn't just a name on a map, it was a spark, but not everyone was ready to celebrate. Max still limped. Even with the swelling down and the wound healing, the damage was permanent. The vet called it structural compromise. Jake called it proof. That dog had survived more than most men, and he still had more loyalty in him than anyone Jake had ever served. They started rehab sessions in the mornings, Jake walking slow beside Max, helping him navigate ramps, turns, uneven ground. Each time Max succeeded, Jake knelt and whispered, "Still got it, buddy." And each time Max responded with a wag, brief but certain. Meanwhile, Valerie expanded the scope of what they'd begun. She set up meetings with regional trainers, arranged conferences with organizations that wanted to establish a national registry of retired canines, one that guaranteed their care, their dignity. The government had failed these animals. Valerie wasn't about to let it happen again. One afternoon she received a letter, handwritten, from a former handler. No name, no return address, just a short paragraph and a crumpled photo of a dog named Ranger. "I did things I can't take back," it read. "But I see what you're doing. I hope you get them all." She showed it to Jake without a word. He nodded once and tucked the photo into the same folder that held Max's original file. Change was slow, but it was coming, and even in the face of what they'd seen, what they'd fought, there was something else now blooming in the edges of their lives: hope. The old training facility had been abandoned for months, its yard overrun with weeds and broken fences. The main building still bore the stains of its last years. Rusted chain-link enclosures, cracked linoleum floors, and the faint smell of bleach clinging to concrete walls. But to Jake, it didn't look like ruin. It looked like a foundation. They arrived with a borrowed trailer and a generator. Robin brought supplies from a neighboring shelter, kennel panels, food containers, worn chew toys. Valerie stood by the gate, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers. Some were strangers who had followed the story online. Others were from town, finally unafraid to be seen supporting the cause. Mia moved among them, sleeves rolled high, laying out plans for veterinary bays and enrichment zones. The goal wasn't just shelter, it was healing. Jake carried Max in from the truck, the dog nestled in a custom sling Robin had made. Max didn't bark, he didn't need to. His eyes swept the place once, and his tail gave a faint thump. Approval. They chose a wide room at the back of the building for him, a quiet space with a patch of sunlight that rolled across the floor every morning. Jake laid down a thick mat, surrounded by familiar smells. Max stretched his good leg and gave a slow, contented sigh. Later that day, more dogs arrived. The first was a German shepherd with scarred ears and a nervous gait, followed by a chocolate lab who refused to leave his crate. Each came with a story. Some had been saved from other towns. Some had been rescued just in time. Many bore the same marks, physical and unseen, as Max. Jake helped walk the first pair down the rehab trail they'd carved through the overgrowth behind the building. The trail was lined with ribbons, notes from donors, and photos of service dogs from across the country. It wasn't just a path, it was a promise. Word spread quickly. Donations arrived from all over. Blankets, chew toys, leashes, even a new treadmill designed for canine therapy. One group from Chicago sent a team of volunteers to help with construction. Another group, based out of Denver, offered to pay for training programs that paired veterans with retired service dogs. The building transformed slowly, walls patched, doors repainted, the broken becoming whole again, piece by piece. Susan returned to cover the progress, camera in hand, notebook full. Her latest piece focused on Max, not just as a symbol, but as a dog, one who still limped but never looked away, one who had taken a bullet and refused to give up. Readers flooded her inbox with letters, People wanted to adopt, to help, to learn. Even the town council, previously silent, released a statement supporting the new facility. They didn't mention Donovan. They didn't have to. The weight of silence had already lifted. One afternoon, as Jake was unloading a shipment of food, a familiar face approached. Deputy Harris, no longer in uniform, hands stuffed in the pockets of a worn jacket. He didn't say anything at first, just nodded toward the dogs playing behind the fence. "I'd like to help," he said quietly. Jake didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he tilted his head toward the tool shed. "We need another set of hands on the roof." Harris nodded and went to work. That evening, Jake sat on the steps of the building, Max's head resting on his knee. The sunset stretched long across the field. The other dogs barked, chased, sprawled across the grass like they'd never been hurt. Valerie joined him with 2 cups of coffee, setting one down beside him. "You believe it now?" she asked. Jake looked out over the yard. "That things can get better, that you made something better." He didn't answer right away. He just scratched behind Max's ears, watching the dog's eyes flutter shut, not from exhaustion, but peace. The war wasn't gone. But here, for the first time in a long time, it wasn't winning. The letter came folded in a plain envelope. No. Logo, no seal, just Jake's name scrawled across the front in stiff, careful handwriting. It was waiting in the mailbox one cool morning, tucked beneath a flyer for tractor parts and a diner menu. He opened it slowly, standing in the early light with Max beside him, ears perked at the sound of rustling paper. Inside was a single sheet. At the top, the emblem of the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Below that, a short note commending his efforts, acknowledging his role in the exposure of the Greenwood K9 trafficking ring, and inviting him to Washington to receive the Civic Valor Medal. It wasn't military issued, but it was official. He read it twice. Then he folded it again and slipped it into his back pocket without a word. Word spread fast. Mia posted a short message on the rescue center's page. Jake Thompson and Max to be honored for their courage. One dog, one man. A town forever changed. Within hours, the post was shared across dozens of platforms. Local news outlets picked it up first, then national ones. Interviews were requested. Journalists came knocking. Jake turned most of them away. Valerie handled the press when she could, standing stone-faced in front of cameras, her voice calm and clipped. "This isn't about medals," she told one reporter. "It's about responsibility and about making sure no dog is ever treated like a tool again." Max didn't understand the attention, but he seemed to know he was being looked at differently. Kids who visited the facility lined up to pet him, their fingers brushing his worn fur with reverence. Volunteers who once tiptoed around him now sat beside him on the floor, heads bent as if in prayer. He soaked in the affection quietly, as though he'd been waiting his whole life to be seen like this. A week later, a black SUV arrived, not tinted this time, not shadowed or watching, from across the street. This one belonged to a state representative. He stepped out in a grey suit and muddy shoes, shook Jake's hand, and walked the facility with a notepad in hand. "What you've done here," he said near the end, "this is what reform looks like. No speeches, just action." Jake didn't respond. He just opened a kennel door and let a shepherd named Halo out to stretch her legs. The representative crouched to pet her, his smile faint. "We're drafting new legislation, mandatory inspections, federal guidelines for training and adoption. Your story, it's already shaping policy." Later, Valerie found Jake in the office, leaning against the window with his hands buried in his pockets. "You good?" she asked. He nodded. "I just didn't think any of this would matter to anyone up there." "It matters more than they'll admit." Robin came in carrying a box of letters, donations, postcards, handwritten notes from across the country. Some addressed to Max, others to Jake. One from a widow in North Dakota simply said, "My husband never came back from his war. I'm glad you did. Thank you for not giving up." Jake picked it up, held it for a while, then passed it to Valerie without speaking. They flew to D.C. 2 weeks later. Just him and Mia. Valerie declined the trip, claiming paperwork and a mistrust of airplanes. Robin stayed behind with Max, promising daily updates. The ceremony was quiet. No national anthem, no red carpet, just a small room filled with veterans, staff, and a few survivors of the program they helped expose. Jake accepted the medal with a nod and spoke only once. "I'm not the one who was shot and left behind. That was Max. I just followed him." That night, when they returned, Max was waiting by the fence, tail wagging, a soft whine escaping as Jake stepped out of the truck. He didn't run, just sat and waited. Jake walked over, knelt down, and slipped the medal from his pocket, laying it gently in the grass beside him. "For you," he said. Max nudged it with his nose, then laid his head beside it. No cameras, no applause, just a moment, and that was enough. It was a Thursday when Deputy Rawlings showed up again, this time not in uniform, not behind the wheel of a cruiser, and not with a threat balanced on the edge of his tongue. He parked a dusty truck across the road and waited in the driver's seat for almost 10 minutes before finally stepping out. His shoulders sagged in a way Jake had never seen before, not like a man defeated, but like one ready to admit he'd been wrong for too long. Jake met him at the fence. "I heard about the medal," Rawlings said, eyes on the dirt. "And Max?" Jake didn't reply. "I won't ask forgiveness," he continued. I want to do something right before all this is behind me." Max limped forward from the shade of the porch and stood by Jake's leg, watching Rawlings with calm, intelligent eyes. There was no growl this time, no bark, just the quiet judgment of a dog who never forgot, but somehow still allowed second chances. Rawlings reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "I kept notes," he said. "Not official stuff, just things I saw. Things I was too cowardly to say out loud." He held it out. Jake hesitated, then took it. Inside were pages filled with tight handwriting, dates, names, off-the-record drop-offs, small moments that didn't make sense at the time, but meant everything now. Evidence, patterns, another layer to the truth they'd been building for months. "I don't want anything in return," Rawlings said. "Just maybe a way to learn. Help, maybe." Jake studied him. "You ever train a dog without using fear?" Rawlings shook his head. "No." "Then you'll start there." The next morning, Rawlings showed up again. No badge, no bravado, just gloves and work boots. Robin handed him a rake and pointed toward the back pens. No one clapped, no one cheered, but no one turned him away either. Others followed. A former dispatcher who used to turn her head when calls came in about missing dogs. A vet tech who'd once falsified records under orders. A janitor from the old facility who remembered the sound of crates being slammed too hard. They all came, one by one, quietly. Jake didn't ask why. He just put them to work. Max made his rounds every morning, now part guardian, part ambassador. The newer dogs followed him like students behind an old professor. He was slower, sure, but his presence alone calmed them. When he barked, they listened. When he lay down in the sun, they did too. Even Rawlings seemed to soften under Max's watch. He asked questions, took notes, spent hours just sitting by one pen, learning how to earn trust instead of command it. Valerie kept an eye on him for weeks, waiting, watching. But the man who once echoed Donovan's threats had turned into someone else entirely. Quiet, hands calloused from work, eyes no longer hiding shame. Jake found him one evening sitting on the front steps, Max's head resting on his boot. "He still doesn't trust me," Rawlings said. Jake nodded. "But he doesn't hate you either." "Close enough," Rawlings muttered. That night, the facility held its first official volunteer dinner. Nothing fancy. Folding tables, crockpots of chili, a few too many lawn chairs. But it was packed. Farmers, teachers, officers, activists. People who, months earlier, wouldn't have stood in the same room. Jake sat beside Mia, watching the crowd. Valerie stood near the food table, arms crossed, nodding as a young girl explained how she wanted to train her rescued beagle to be a therapy dog. Robin passed out mugs with the facility's logo, just a silhouette of Max's profile beneath a line of text that read, "Second Chances." always. As the evening faded into stars and quiet laughter, Jake felt something settle in his chest. Not pride, not even relief, just peace. Not everyone had come to hurt, some had come to heal, and maybe that was enough. The first patrol wasn't much to look at. Just 3 volunteers, 2 retired officers, and 1 old dog with a limp. But it moved through the neighborhood like something sacred, quiet and steady. A visible reminder that Greenwood had changed. Not by force, not by decree, but by the slow, relentless work of people who chose to care. They called it the Neighborhood Unity Walk. It wasn't about policing, it wasn't even about watching, it was about showing up. Jake had been skeptical when Mia pitched the idea, thinking it would feel performative, maybe even naive. But when Max took his place at the front, head high and tail low, it suddenly made sense. Presence mattered. The program grew faster than anyone expected. Valerie helped organize schedules, pairing each dog with a volunteer, veterans, students, even a couple of former skeptics who had once called the facility a waste of space. Now they showed up early, asking for updates on training techniques and carrying water bottles for the dogs. Jake watched it all unfold with cautious optimism. He wasn't used to seeing systems work, but this wasn't about a system. It was about individuals choosing to be better than they were yesterday. One night, he found Rawlings sitting outside the kennels, talking softly to a young Labrador named Ranger. No commands, no leash, just a man trying to explain his regrets to a creature who only cared that he was there now. Jake didn't interrupt. Max, old as he was, still insisted on joining every patrol. He moved slower, and sometimes Jake had to lift him into the truck when his hips flared up. But once he was on his feet, he was the same dog. A steady shadow. A silent protector. Kids started to know his name. They'd run out to the sidewalk. When they saw him coming, waving, shouting, "I'm Max!" He'd wag his tail, always polite, never overly eager. Jake sometimes wondered if the dog understood the role he played, if he felt the weight of being more than a symbol he never showed. Yet at the center, things had settled into a rhythm. Dogs came in, some frightened, some aggressive, some so shut down it took days to get them to look anyone in the eye. But one by one they responded, to soft voices, to consistent meals, to the quiet dignity of being treated like something more than a tool. Volunteers kept coming, people from other towns now, some looking to help, others looking to copy. Mia started traveling once a month to consult on building similar programs elsewhere. Robin stayed behind to manage operations, clipboard always in hand, phone always buzzing. Valerie maintained her post like a field commander, overseeing everything with steady precision. Jake spent more time in the kennels, not because he had to, but because that's where he felt the most at peace. He'd sit beside the dogs that no one else could get close to, speaking in low tones, just being there. He wasn't trying to fix them. He knew better. He just gave them space to learn how to trust again. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, he'd take Max up the ridge where it all began. The trees had grown thicker since the warehouse had been raided, the road now overgrown and rarely used. Jake would sit on the tailgate of the truck, Max beside him, and they'd watch the wind move through the grass like a memory. The scars hadn't faded. Not on Max, not on Jake, but they had become part of something else, something built, not broken. Back in town, fences that once divided started coming down, some literal, some not. The old diner now hosted monthly town meetings, where folks debated things like playground lighting and community garden plots. Nothing big, nothing historic. Just normal problems for a town that had finally started healing. Jake didn't talk much at those meetings. He usually sat in the back, Max resting at his feet, listening. But when he did speak, people leaned in. Because they knew he didn't waste words. And when he nodded even just once, it meant the idea was worth listening. So Greenwood wasn't perfect. It probably never would be, but it was different, and that difference had started with a wounded dog who wouldn't give up. and a man who'd followed him through fire. The sky was clear the morning of the gathering. Late autumn air held just enough chill to remind everyone that winter was near, but the sun kept it gentle. It was the kind of day that made things feel hopeful, like the world was easing into something better. The new facility stood ready, every corner cleaned, every kennel polished, every banner hung straight. Jake stood near the main gate, watching cars pull into the dirt lot one by one. Families came first, kids in sneakers, parents holding folded chairs under their arms, a few with leashes trailing happy rescued dogs. Then came volunteers in their shirts with the logo, Max's silhouette above the words, "Second Chances." Always. Valerie had chosen the phrase herself, not because it sounded noble, but because it was true. Every person, every animal here had been broken at some point, and every single one had chosen to come back. Jake helped set up the folding tables, shaking hands when he had to, nodding politely when people thanked him. He didn't linger in the spotlight. He let others take it. Mia, Robin, even Rawlings, who now handled half the adoption coordination. No one questioned his presence anymore. He wasn't the man they feared, not anymore. Max stayed close to the edge of the crowd, lying under the shade of a tent with a cooling pad and a big bowl of water beside him. His muzzle had gone almost completely grey, and his limp was more pronounced these days. But his eyes hadn't lost a bit of sharpness. He tracked every movement, every laugh, every unfamiliar sound, as if the role of protector had never left his bones. The main event was a demonstration. Nothing flashy, just a few of the newer dogs running an agility course Robin had built behind the center. Simple jumps, weaving poles, a mock search scenario with a hidden volunteer. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. The crowd clapped with every success, cheered louder with every recovered misstep. When the chocolate lab named Murphy completed his course, without freezing in fear halfway through for the first time, Jake looked over and saw Valerie wiping her eye. Quickly, pretending the sun had gotten to her, Max didn't run the course. He didn't need to. But when Jake clipped the leash to his collar and led him out to the center of the yard, the crowd fell silent. It wasn't a moment they had planned. It just felt right. Jake crouched beside Max and tapped the old command. "Stay." Then he walked across the field, turned, and held out his hand. Max stood slowly. The limp was still there. It would always be. But he moved forward with that same focused determination he'd shown from the start. No hesitation, no fear, just resolve. When he reached Jake, the applause started. Not loud, not explosive, just long and steady. The kind that comes from people who understand what they're seeing. A survivor, a leader, a symbol of everything that had changed. Afterward, there were speeches, short ones. Susan spoke briefly about the impact the center had made across the state. A retired general presented a certificate of recognition on behalf of a national K9 alliance. Mia thanked the volunteers. Robin thanked the donors. Valerie refused the mic entirely, but everyone clapped when her name was mentioned. Then came the unveiling. Near the garden along the fence line, they'd placed a stone plaque. Simple, clean, just a silhouette of a dog and a few carved words. Beneath it, for those who served without question and suffered without voice, you are seen, you are remembered, you are free. Jake stood beside it for a long time once the crowd moved away, hand resting on Max's back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Max sat beside him, head held high, looking out across the field. The celebration turned into a potluck. Music played from a borrowed speaker. Dogs ran through the grass. Kids tossed frisbees. Someone brought a cake shaped like a paw print. Valerie pretended to complain about the noise, but stayed the entire time, sipping black coffee and smiling. When no one was watching, as the sun dropped toward the horizon, Jake and Max walked the perimeter of the fence, one last time. Just the two of them, old habit, old ritual. And at the far corner, where the trail met the woods, Jake paused. "Look, what you started," he whispered. Max didn't look up. He didn't have to. They stood there together in the fading light, a man and his dog, surrounded by laughter, by life, by proof that something lost could be found again. The mornings had grown quieter since the celebration, not empty, just gentler. As winter crept in, the air sharpened and the light softened, filtering through frost-covered windows in long, golden lines. The facility still buzzed with purpose. New dogs arriving. Volunteers bustling in early with hot coffee and layered coats, but beneath it all was a different rhythm, a settled one. Jake woke early as always. Max had taken to sleeping on a thick pad beside the heater in Jake's room, his breath slow and steady, his eyes opening just enough to track movement before drifting shut again. Age was finally catching up to him. He still made his rounds, still raised his head when new visitors entered, but the fire that once drove him to action had shifted into something calmer. He had done his part. Now, he simply watched the world. He helped change. Jake spent more time in the office these days, helping with paperwork, reviewing applications, answering letters from towns looking to replicate what they'd built in Greenwood. He didn't enjoy it, but he understood the importance. This place was no longer just a shelter. It was a blueprint, a place that showed what could happen when enough people refused to look away. One morning, he stood at the kitchen sink, watching the frost melt from the tall grass behind the facility. His mind drifted to that first night, when Max disappeared, when he thought he'd lose the only thing that still made sense to him. So much had changed since then. People had changed. He had changed. He thought of Donovan, not with anger, not even with pity, just with understanding. Men like that didn't start out monsters. They were made slowly, piece by choices they convinced themselves were necessary. But choices always caught up. Jake had learned that too. Valerie still came by every day, though now she wore a scarf over her shoulder where her old service patch used to be. She never spoke of retirement, never hinted at slowing down. Her place wasn't behind a desk or inside an empty house. It was here, among dogs and dirt and work that never really ended. She and Jake often sat in silence, sipping black coffee in metal mugs, watching Max sun himself on the porch like a king surveying his land. Mia had taken on a national role, traveling more often, but always returning with new ideas, new partnerships. Robin ran the day-to-day now, her voice firm, her hands always busy. Together, they kept the center not just alive, but growing. That afternoon, a school bus pulled up with a class of third graders. It was part of a new program, Compassion in Training, teaching kids how to interact with animals who'd been through trauma. Jake watched from a distance as Max was gently led forward by a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8. She knelt down, pressed her hand to his chest, and whispered something only he could hear. Max leaned into her, slow and trusting. Jake felt something stir in his chest, not sadness, not even pride, just peace. Later that evening, he took Max for a walk down the ridge trail. It was colder now, and the dog's steps were slower, but he moved with purpose. Jake let him set the pace. They reached the old overlook just as the sun dipped below the trees, spilling orange fire across the sky. He sat down in the grass, and Max curled beside him with a soft sigh. Jake looked out across the town, the facility's lights flickering on in the distance, the sound of laughter echoing faintly up the hill. He thought of everything that had led them here, the blood, the fear, the nights filled with questions and the days fueled by stubborn hope. He thought of the names of the dogs they'd saved, the people who had changed, the bridges they had rebuilt, and he thought of Max, the broken K9 no one wanted, the dog who refused to give up, the one who never left his side. "You did good," Jake said quietly. Max thumped his tail once, then rested his head on Jake's boot. They stayed like that until the sun was gone and the stars crept in, silent and steady. Down below, life moved forward, and at the top of the hill a man and his dog sat in stillness, the weight of everything behind them finally at rest.